one of the things that I think I was making a comment earlier in the week, I think we probably are in the most prolific time in travel in the amount of investments that are happening in technology, whether they are companies or initiatives or newer things that are coming which did not exist a couple of years back. But if you look at a sum total of all of those investments being made and the discrete point solutions, whether they're software solutions or others that are being produced and being offered, and then you look on the other side and we look at the whole swath of hotels that are there across the world, and we look at how well they've adopted those solutions and how well they have not only adoption but also how well they have benefited from those solutions. That record is fairly dismal. What's the use of a very cool solution being there, but if it's only a couple of thousand hotels using it worldwide? I think there's a huge opportunity as an industry, and I think everybody's responsible. I'm not pointing fingers at hotel companies. I think, or hotel owners or independent hotels. I'm actually even saying that collectively, technology companies and hotels need to solve for that.
I think I like to put things in themes. It kind of makes it simple. My two themes that I think about in technology is one is high touch through high tech. So how do we enable the technology to serve us as hospitality people or hoteliers? I think technology is too complex. We give people too many choices, and we make it far too complicated for people to interact with technology and to use technology. And how do we do that efficiently going forward as technology improves? How do we take a lot of that complexity away? The other theme that I'm starting to develop is around seamless intelligence. So we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about the seamless experience. Sorry to mention experience, RJ. And I'm putting the two together to come up with this theme of seamless intelligence, which really means how do we enable a guest journey that really is seamless from the dream to the share stage, and how do we use technology to effectively enable that? Why do I still need to use 6 or 7 apps for a trip? Why do I need to tell the hotel when I'm late, and why isn't my system, my technology doing that already automatically? Why are there so many different touch points that I have to still manually interact with people? So if we use technology effectively, bring those two together, high touch through high tech, and create some seamless intelligence between all the different points in a customer journey, I think that will go a long way.
I think the opportunity starts with breaking down all these silos that exist in the technology stack, right? I think we're in an industry that's to a great extent dysfunctional in the sense related to technology, and it comes from problems on the supply side and the demand side. On the supply side, I think the challenge is a very, very fragmented offer. These silos, what am I talking about? Just quickly, you've got the PMS, online reputation, surveys, things like case management, revenue management, channel managers, rate shoppers, CRM, et cetera, et cetera. There's somewhere, depending on the property, you're talking about between 12 and 20 different types of technology in the technology stack. And so from the supply side, there's nobody that covers all of those categories, or even most of them, right? But there's still problems about integration. A lot of the technology companies that are being built, like ReviewPro or others, their world is very much a walled garden, right? They're trying to protect that data and keep it locked within their environment. And I think that's a big error for the suppliers themselves, and it kind of limits this evolution. On the demand side, I think oftentimes there's a certain lack of vision within the industry and understanding of technology. So much of it is focused on technology as an expense, when if this starts to play out in the right way, this is not an expense. This is a way to drive ROI and better experiences, et cetera, right? So I think that there are these challenges, and especially, like I said, everything I say would be less focused more on the big global brands, but everybody else. There's a problem of talent. If you're a mid-sized brand, it's very difficult to have, one of our clients, Arlo, they're here today, and it was interesting last week. This is a brand that has 2 hotels, and they're doing amazing things about how they're stitching together multiple partners into a really cool platform. but they have talent, they have experience, and they have resources that most hotels don't have. So there's this challenge that makes them. And then lastly, I think one of the big limiters of opportunity of getting to where it's slowing down the industry to get to this point where you can deal with single or fewer providers with the right technologies is there's a lack of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, in this industry. It's interesting, you have so many startups doing cool things that develop technology that the Sabres, the Amadeus, the Travel Clicks, et cetera, these big brands, they're just, it's more difficult for them to do, innovate and build those products, but there's very, very little M&A activity here.
So very similar to kind of my fellow guests here, I have two big themes. The first one I think many of you touched upon is fragmentation. The second one is guest experience. So let's talk about fragmentation a little bit. If you look at hospitality tech, it's a truly fragmented landscape in terms of technology. So you have many best of breed systems, silos if you may, and then integrations, loosely defined integrations connect those today. But the fundamental thing is what that causes is a lot of friction, not only from an operations standpoint, but also a merchandising, retailing standpoint, a distribution standpoint, and also ultimately guest feels that as well in different forms and fashions. Second thing I want to talk about is guest experience. So let's say we go and book, you're driving to like the Cornell Statler Hotel, and then you make a reservation on one of the OTAs in the parking lot. You walk into the hotel. And guess what? Your reservation's not there. The reason is it takes 6 to 7 hops between a CRS player, the OTA, the hotel's PMS to actually get that reservation into the hotel. And so that is very, very frictionful customer experience or guest experience. How do we get rid of that? The integration actually helps. One of the fundamental tenets of hospitality is to be recognized. Recognize the guest, acknowledge the guest. And I want technology to help do that, actually. And that's one of the holy grails, like guest experiences. And how do we use data and analytics to kind of combine multiple different systems to seamlessly interconnect and have intelligence so we can action on guests at every touch point.
I honestly think the biggest opportunity is to bring the human element back into hospitality. And the segmentations as we knew them back then, or even 2 or 3 years ago, really have very little value anymore. The second thing, and this is really, we tend to forget, or we tend to look to technology to solve all kinds of things. But we're really always only talking about the 5% of guests that are repeat customers. So whether it is recognizing a face, whether it is knowing one's preferences, and so on, that's 5% of your guests. The other 95% are completely anonymous, and there are much bigger opportunity. In the restaurant space, you're looking at 1.5% of guests that are repeat guests. And everybody else is not being actioned on. And this is really where the biggest opportunities are. Now, the most powerful machine to recognize faces is the human brain. And but when you walk up to a front desk, it is increasingly rare that someone will actually look in your eyes. A month ago, J.D. Powers published a study, and they determined that the first human-to-human interaction at the moment of check-in, that's your first interaction at the hotel, has a 90% influence over the feedback that the customer will leave for his or her hotel stay. That's enormous. Yet we tend to play in these, borderline cool stuff, very cool, of course, and it's cool to geek out over technology. But if you go into hospitality, you're in a non-tangible business, you're in a sensory business. And yet we seem to do everything we possibly can to take that out of hospitality by making the check-in mobile. Leave that to the limited service economy where it's a price play and nothing else. But for anything full service, even extended stay, people are going there for a temporary home, to have a warm welcome. They have a flight of 10 hours in their boats, and we're not even greeted anymore. That, I think, is the single biggest opportunity in hotels.
And there's a lot of hurdles that we face in hospitality, right? It's a very decentralized business. Even in a big brand-centric world like the US, it's still, for the most part, at the unit level, decentralized. We have a workforce that has a lot of contact with our client that is not overly educated or overly compensated, right? And for years, when we think about technology and revenue management, what I've been involved with for a long time, we've been trying to move the needle a little bit here and there, right? And I think part of this is, I guess, kind of putting together what Pierre is talking about as well as what everyone else is talking about, is we at some level, we need to separate aspects of the stay, right? So I think there's no point in trying to combat the Expedias and the Googles, et cetera, of the world. Let's sort of think about that demand capture part as given and let it be well intermediated, right? And then as a firm, how do I incentivize people through technology to connect with me and book with me, right? I think that revenue management has always talked about maybe a 6 or a 10% gain in revenue through really good systems, and that means going from no revenue management to rock solid revenue management. Most firms have some level of revenue management. And in our world of intermediation, we're thinking of cost of acquisition going from 10% to 20%, right? And as more and more of our demand moves to that intermediated space, then a lot of the things we try and do with technology become secondary or tertiary effects and are no longer primary impactors of profitability, right? And so we need to think about, well, how do I really think I can impact profitability? I think some of that comes from what Pierre is talking about, is letting our people do what they need to do to create a great experience so that RJ can measure that. But at the same time, we need to add services through technology that can't be added via intermediation. But just simple things like at point of reservation, definitely at point of check-in, providing access to rooms. The kind of stuff that Hilton is starting to do, and the ability to upgrade. Those are just little small things which can move that transaction channel. And I think if we get those hurdles out of the way, then that allows people to do the kind of things that Pierre is talking about, where I don't have to worry about logistics anymore, right? So we'll let the big firms do demand capture, we'll deliver on service, and we'll make sure we add services and amenities that, at the point of booking, facilitate people coming to us direct versus intermediated, right?
So defragmenting the inventory and keeping that flexibility to reassign the rooms at a moment's notice is critically important for the business. But the guest experience shouldn't suffer from that. When you look at things like TripAdvisor, 50 to 70% of negative reviews are about, I asked for a king bed and I didn't get it. I booked a high floor and I didn't get it. And it matters very little that there's this big disclaimer that, the hotel will do its best, but there's no guarantee. To the guest, that sets an expectation. Now, this has increased the more we automated it. As long as it was just a comments field, the expectation was relatively low for a guarantee. The moment it became a radio button or a drop-down list of bed types and stuff of that nature, there's automatically a presumption that something is managing that. Now, if you imagine, now for a second, we go to attribute-based selling, and people actually pay for these features, and we're unable to deliver on it. Now we're really talking about a feedback catastrophe.